A gun was pointed straight at my daughter's forehead. I heard someone bark, "Don't move!" and every muscle in my body locked. The man holding the weapon wasn't a burglar, not some intruder. He was the security officer hired by our own HOA. His reason? My daughter looked suspicious walking up to her own front door at 10 p.m. What he didn't know, my daughter is an FBI tactical team leader who has spent the last 5 years running some of the most dangerous raids in the country. And from that moment on, everything in our gated paradise started to unravel. Before I go on, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. Because if you've ever dealt with a power-tripping HOA, this story is going to feel uncomfortably familiar. My name is Daniel Carter, 59 years old, retired international negotiator for the U.S. government. I spent 3 decades sitting at tables with hostile ministers, corrupt officials, and nervous ambassadors. I thought I'd seen every flavor of arrogance and abuse of power humanity could produce. Then I moved into Silver Ridge Landing, a picture-perfect gated community in upstate New York that promised serene lakeside living with world-class security and community standards. What they didn't print in the glossy brochure, the fact that those standards were enforced by a small-town dictator with a logo on his polo shirt. My wife died from a stroke 6 years ago. After years of bouncing between embassies and temporary apartments, I wanted one thing, a quiet home I could actually unpack my life in. Silver Ridge Landing looked like a dream. Immaculate lawns, a man-made lake that turned gold at sunset, a clubhouse with floor-to-ceiling windows, and this part appealed to the ex-diplomat in me. 24/7 professional security. I'd been there barely 4 months when my daughter came back into the picture. Lauren Carter, 27. While I spent my life in conference rooms, she chose the sharp end of the stick, federal law enforcement. She graduated near the top of her class at Quantico, moved into tactical work faster than anyone expected, and now commands a specialized FBI entry team that deals with high-risk warrants and complex financial crime takedowns. I know only fragments of what she actually does, but I know this: she's calm where other people panic, and she can read a chaotic scene like a chessboard. When she called and said, "Dad, I finally have 3 weeks of actual leave. Mind if I come hide at your place and sleep for a year?" I almost dropped the phone. We hadn't had more than a rushed dinner together in nearly 2 years. She'd just wrapped up an international joint operation she couldn't tell me anything about, and all I wanted was to cook her real food and show her the house I'd bought partly because I kept picturing her sitting on the back deck with a cup of coffee. There was just one problem I hadn't fully appreciated yet: the HOA. Silver Ridge Landing was run by Gregory Greg Whitman, a 61-year-old former logistics executive who talked like he still had people reporting to him in 5 time zones. Tall, silver hair, carefully trimmed beard, the kind of man whose handshake lasts a beat too long. His wife Vanessa dressed like every day was a charity brunch. Together, they treated the neighborhood like their private kingdom. From week 1, I was on their radar. The welcome packet was an inch thick, exact Pantone codes for acceptable house paint, diagrams for approved mailbox angles, restrictions on what you could have on your porch between the hours of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. And lurking behind those bylaws was the man who made them feel sharp: Brent Cole, 43, former city cop pushed out after a pattern of questionable incidents. Now he wore a dark security uniform with Silver Ridge Protective Services on his chest and patrolled our streets in a marked SUV like he was securing a war zone instead of cul-de-sacs full of retirees and young families. He never smiled. He smirked. The night everything blew up, Lauren's flight from Frankfurt was late. Her connection was delayed, baggage took forever, the usual mess. By the time she texted, "Just past the front gate, see you in 3, it was around 10 p.m. I had given her the gate code, the address, and a key. What I hadn't done was email the HOA to declare in triplicate that my own daughter might appear on my own property after dark. Apparently, that was a sin. I was standing in the hallway listening for her car when raised voices drifted in through the front door. One of them was Lauren's, steady, low. The other was louder, hostile, dripping authority it hadn't earned. I yanked open the door. There she was, on the walkway, travel backpack slung over one shoulder, small duffel at her feet, hands held loosely out to her sides. Brent stood 6 feet away, arm extended, pistol aimed straight at her face. His partner, a younger guard named Eli, hovered behind him, palm pressed to his own holster. "I don't care what badge you're flashing. You don't have resident clearance. You match a suspicious description. Down on your knees now, or I treat you as a threat." The porch light threw everything into hard contrast. Lauren's calm expression, the matte black of Brent's sidearm, the pale curtain faces of neighbors peeking out from behind blinds. She didn't flinch. Her breathing was slow, shoulders relaxed. I could practically see her brain cataloging. Privately owned Glock 19, finger too close to the trigger, stance sloppy, adrenaline high, zero awareness of her or of me stepping into the doorway. "Brent!" I shouted, my voice coming out rougher than I expected. "That's my daughter!" I started down the steps, instinct screaming at me to get between them. Lauren shifted half a step, subtly blocking me, without taking her eyes off Brent. "Dad, stop right there!" She wasn't scared. She was managing me and him at the same time. Brent held his ground for a long, dangerous heartbeat, the power rush written across his face.
"Your daughter," he said, finally lowering the barrel a fraction. "Should have checked in at the front gate, Mr. Carter. We have protocols here, no exceptions, not even for," he sneered, "people who claim to be FBI." Only once the muzzle was pointed at the ground did Lauren speak in that crisp, controlled tone I'd heard only a few times in my life. "Mr. Cole," she said, "you should know that pointing a firearm at a federal officer without cause is grounds for a very real felony charge. Also, this state requires a specific armed guard endorsement for private security, which I strongly suspect you don't have." For the first time, he blinked. Color drained out of his cheeks, came back in a darker shade of red. "This is private property," he snapped, but the conviction was gone. "Different rules here. I'll be filing a report with Mr. Whitman. Expect to hear from the HOA board." He holstered the gun like he thought it made him look professional instead of reckless, jerked his head at Eli, and stalked off down the sidewalk. I watched them go, my hands shaking with anger that had nowhere to go. Once the security SUV turned the corner, I pulled Lauren into the house and shut the door with more force than necessary. "I'm so sorry," I said, which felt laughably small. "They run tight security here, but that was completely unprofessional, illegal, dangerous," she finished, dropping her bag and giving me a brief hug. "It's okay, Dad. I've had worse first impressions." She stepped back, eyes already sharp again. "But we're not just going to let it slide. That man is a problem, not because he's competent, but because he isn't, and he's armed. That's the worst combination you can have in a position of authority." We sat in the kitchen until after midnight, tea cooling in our mugs as she asked pointed questions about the HOA, security, who hired whom, and how things were usually handled. To me, it had just been annoying. To her, it was a pattern. Finally, she leaned back, thoughtful. "You know, the biggest cases I work on aren't always the glamorous stuff. Sometimes the monsters are the small-time tyrants who think nobody's watching." I smiled, grateful she was home, and secretly hoping this would all blow over.
I had no idea that that moment on the front path was only the opening move. The next morning, someone knocked on our door at 8 a.m. sharp. On the doorstep stood Greg Whitman, fully pressed khakis, HOA-branded quarter zip, and that permanent corporate presentation smile. Vanessa hovered half a step behind him, wearing a tennis outfit that had never seen sweat and clutching a leather binder like a prop. "Daniel," he said, already stepping inside as if invited, "we need to discuss last night's incident." His tone had all the syrup of manufactured concern layered over unspoken contempt. "Incident," I repeated. "Your security chief pointed a gun at my daughter for the crime of coming home." "Our security team followed protocol," he said smoothly. "If you had properly logged your guest, this could have been avoided." "She's not a guest," I snapped. Years of diplomatic self-control slipped for a second. "She lives here when she's on leave, and no protocol justifies drawing a weapon on an unarmed woman showing ID." At that moment, Lauren stepped into the hallway in jeans and a t-shirt, hair tied back, utterly composed. "Mr. Whitman," she said pleasantly, "I appreciate the visit. As I told Mr. Cole, I'm interested in whether your armed personnel are actually licensed to be armed. I saw some things last night that made me professionally curious." Greg's smile flickered for half a second. "All our staff meet or exceed state standards," he replied, tightening his grip on the envelope in his hand. "This," he added, thrusting it at me, "is a formal warning for failure to comply with guest notification policy. Let's just sign it and move forward, shall we?" "We won't be signing anything," Lauren said, still polite. "Thank you for your time." She gently closed the door while Greg was still mid-sentence. Through the sidelight window, I watched him walk away, Vanessa already whispering furiously, no doubt prepping the day's gossip. That was satisfying, also possibly ill-advised. Voren grinned. Boundaries matter. We just drew ours. Later that day, we met Helen Marsh, 67, retired librarian, who lived 2 houses down. She brought over a blueberry pie. "To welcome your daughter properly this time," she said with a wink. Once the polite small talk was out of the way, the truth started to leak out. "Greg and Vanessa have had this place in a chokehold for years," Helen said, eyes narrowed over her teacup. "Anyone who complains gets buried in violation letters. People sell just to get away from them." Lauren listened more than she spoke, asking a handful of surgical questions that mapped the power dynamics of Silver Ridge Landing far better than I had in 4 months. We started noticing things. Brent's security SUV parked across from our house for hours at a time. Neighbors who had been friendly suddenly found reasons to cross the street or duck indoors. New violation slips appeared in our mailbox. Garden hose visible from the street, porch light too bright, recycling bin lid not fully closed. Lauren turned our kitchen table into an operations desk. She spread out the HOA bylaws, pulled up state statutes on her laptop, and began marking clauses in the association documents that were flatly unenforceable. "This bylaw about warrantless property inspections," she said, tapping one page, "absolutely illegal. This one giving the board unilateral authority to suspend amenities because they feel unsafe, also illegal." On Tuesday, she went to the gym. At least, that's what I thought. When she came back, she mentioned in passing that she'd bumped into Vanessa at the local organic grocery store. The story that followed sounded like a scene from a bad reality show. Vanessa had accidentally rammed her cart into Lauren's. "Oh, you must be the agent," she said loudly, so half the aisle could hear. "Hopefully you're not here to investigate any of us. We're all law-abiding citizens here, unlike some people who think rules don't apply to them." Lauren, of course, didn't take the bait. "Actually," she said with that mild little smile I'd learned to fear on other people's behalf, "financial crimes are my specialty. It's amazing what people stash in HOA budgets and think nobody will check. Someone else had heard that exchange, too. A woman in a blazer and flats, hair pulled back in a neat twist. Rachel Wong, 41, real estate attorney, and, as it turned out, a member of the HOA, increasingly fed up with Greg's rule. She approached Lauren in the parking lot. "I'm Rachel," she said, offering a card. "I couldn't help hearing that you work financial cases. There are irregularities here that some of us have been quietly collecting. If you're serious about looking into things, we should talk." By the time Lauren relayed this to me that evening, her eyes had that familiar spark I used to see when she was solving puzzles as a kid, only sharper now. "Sometimes," she said, "you don't go looking for cases. They come and knock on your door with a gun." The annual HOA meeting was scheduled for that Thursday. Lauren insisted we go. The community center was arranged like a courtroom. Greg and Vanessa sat at a raised table with David Mercer, the treasurer, and Brent looming nearby like hired muscle. We were placed in the back row, the HOA equivalent of Siberia, which only made it easier for Lauren to observe everyone without being watched herself. Greg launched into a long speech about protecting property values and preserving our shared standards. Vanessa announced upcoming events at the clubhouse with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. David rattled off a financial summary that sounded like a weather report than an actual breakdown of hundreds of thousands of dollars. When Greg asked for questions, nobody moved. The room had the heavy silence of people used to being smacked down. I raised my hand. "Daniel," Greg said, sounding like he were humoring a difficult client, "I noticed that security expenditures have increased by nearly 30% this year, yet there's no itemization in the report. Could we see a list of vendors and contract amounts?" The room shifted. Heads turned. Greg's smile thinned. "Security is our highest priority, Mr. Carter. The board has reviewed all expenses." Lauren watched his micro-expressions like a hawk. "I understand," I said mildly, "but as residents funding those expenses, we have a legal right to transparency. I'd like to review the detailed statements." David fumbled with his papers. "The detailed reports are internal, for board eyes only." Rachel stood up. "As a board member," she said clearly, "I haven't seen an itemized security breakdown in over a year." Murmurs rolled through the room like distant thunder. Brent shifted to stand a little closer to me, his posture loaded with threat. Greg abruptly closed the Q&A and bulldozed through the rest of the agenda. As the meeting broke up, Curtis, Brent, blocked my car with his SUV in the parking lot. "Sir, your parking angle is in violation of community standards. 15 degrees from the curb is the maximum. You're at least 20. It was petty and obvious. I almost laughed, until Lauren laid a hand on my arm. "Mr. Cole," she said, leaning forward, her phone in her hand, very obviously recording, "you're obstructing a vehicle without cause. That's a traffic offense. I'm calling a friend at the department who can clarify the law for you." She dialed, and in a tone I'd never heard her use with me, said, "Hey Sam, it's Lauren Carter. I'm stuck at Silver Ridge Landing. Private security is blocking our vehicle and inventing violations. Can you send a unit?" The transformation in Brent was instant. He paled, signaled his partner, and whipped the SUV into reverse so fast he nearly hit a lamppost. As we drove away, I caught sight of Greg and Vanessa on the steps, watching us with a mixture of fury and, for the first time, unease. Back at home, Lauren pulled out a growing stack of documents. "The security company on these invoices," she said, tapping a name I didn't recognize, "Sentinel Ridge Services, LLC. No website, virtual office address, no record of other clients." She flipped to another page. They're being paid high-end metro rates for elite patrol coverage, she continued. But from what I've seen, it's one beat-up SUV and 4 barely trained guards. The math doesn't add up, Dad. And that's just the start. She laid out more financials Rachel had quietly fed her: inflated landscaping charges, infrastructure improvements nobody could remember seeing, line items that vanished into vague categories. It was like watching a magician's trick in reverse. The more she showed me, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about one guy with a gun. It was a whole system built on fear, opacity, and the assumption that nobody would dare look too closely. And Lauren had just decided to turn on all the lights.
The Whitmans hit back fast. By Monday, we'd received 6 new violation notices. Our trash can allegedly 3 inches too close to the curb, patio chairs visible from the street when not in use, front yard grass 1/2 inch over the recommended height, a wind chime creating potential noise disturbance, my flag improperly illuminated, an unauthorized camera device on the porch, a doorbell cam. It was so over the top it would have been funny if you didn't know how many people they'd ground down with the same tactics. Lauren didn't flinch. She installed discreet, high-end security cameras under the eaves, behind shrubs, in the corners of windows, well within our property lines and legal rights. Evidence, she said simply. Bullies always overplay their hand when they think nobody's keeping score. She was right. 3 nights later, at 2:47 a.m., Brent and one of his guards appeared in our yard with flashlights, measuring tape, and clipboards. They paced off our flower beds, photographed our fence, and even measured the exact angle of my grill relative to the patio door. Every second of it went to cloud storage. The next escalation came in the form of tears on our doorstep. Helen showed up clutching a crumpled notice. "She told me," she said, voice shaking, "that if I keep associating with disruptive residents, they can review whether I'm a good fit for the community. And she hinted they'd complain about the noise when my grandkids visit." Lauren sat her down with a gentleness that didn't match the hard light now in her eyes. "They don't have that power," Lauren said. "They only have what people believe they have. You're not alone anymore, Helen. I promise you that." That evening, we watched cars pull up to the Whitmans' house. David the treasurer, Brent, and a couple of other bored loyalists filed in, carrying folders and laptops. The meeting ran late. Shadows moved across their curtains. Voices drifted faintly across the manicured grass. "They're trying to get ahead of something," Lauren said. "Good. They're already too late." The next morning, 3 things happened in quick succession. First, Special Agent Marcus Hill, one of Lauren's closest colleagues and the financial crimes specialist, arrived at my house with a duffel bag and a tired smile. "Vacation?" I asked. "Working one," he said. "Lauren told me you have some very interesting spreadsheets." Second, Officer Sam Rodriguez from the local department stopped by in uniform for coffee and left with a flash drive Lauren handed him containing the footage of Brent threatening her and his midnight inspections. Third, Rachel texted, "Emergency board session tonight. Greg pushing for new bylaws. You might want to be there." All day, our living room buzzed. Marcus and Lauren spread out financials, contracts, HOA minutes, bank statements Rachel had risked a lot to copy. Sentinel Ridge pulls in over $160,000 a year and pays out maybe half that in actual wages and expenses. The rest? He pointed to a series of transfers to a trust in Delaware, then out again to a property company that just happened to own 3 rentals in Silver Ridge Landing, all mysteriously untouched by enforcement. "And your landscaping contract?" he added, glancing at Rachel.
Same story, different shell company. By 6 p.m., the emergency meeting room was full. Greg sat at the front, Vanessa beside him in a cream blazer, Brent in the back, arms folded, radiating hostility. The first agenda item, revised authority for security operations. The proposed amendment would have given Brent and his team the right to enter any yard and home exteriors at any time for inspection purposes, based solely on reasonable suspicion decided by themselves. Greg was halfway through explaining how necessary this was when I stood. "Point of order," I said. "Before we vote on giving more power to a system we don't fully understand, I think we should talk about how the current power has been used." He tried to shut me down. "This isn't the time, Daniel." A chorus rose. "Let him speak. He has a right. We're paying for this." Rachel cited a bylaw about member comments. Greg had no choice. Lauren hooked her phone to the projector cable Rachel had quietly run to the front. The first video clip appeared on the big screen. Brent in my walkway, gun aimed at Lauren's face, audio crisp and clear. The room gasped. Then a second clip appeared. Brent and his guard in our yard at 3 a.m., measuring, taking photos. A third showed the vandalism they'd committed after one of our conversations, spray paint and trampled plants. "That," I said simply when the lights came back up, "is your security at work." Before the uproar could fully start, Marcus stepped forward, not flashing his badge yet, just a calm man in a button-down with a stack of neatly clipped papers. "I've been asked," he said, "to look at some of the HOA's financials." He clicked to a new slide. Side-by-side charts. Assessed fees versus actual. Contracts versus market rates. Sentinel Ridge's payments versus wages. In the last 3 years, this HOA has spent nearly $500,000 on security, landscaping, and infrastructure upgrades that don't exist. A large percentage of those funds have gone to companies owned by relatives and associates of Mr. and Mrs. Whitman. Greg exploded. "This is outrageous. This is a private organization. You have no right." That's when Marcus showed his badge. "Special Agent Marcus Hill, FBI," he said, voice still mild. Silence. Sam, in uniform at the back, took that exact moment to step forward and say, "Just for the record, Mr. Cole is under investigation for illegal weapons carry and multiple harassment complaints." All eyes snapped to Brent. He stood up so fast his chair tipped over. "This is a setup," he snarled, glaring at me and Lauren. "You think you can drag my name through the mud?" His hand twitched toward his jacket. I didn't even see Lauren move. 1 second, Brent was looming, red-faced, hand near his firearm. The next, he was on the floor, disarmed, one arm twisted neatly behind his back, Lauren's knee braced between his shoulder blades. Years of training compressed into 3 clean motions. No drama, no wasted movement. Sam was there in 2 strides, snapping cuffs on Brent and reading charges so quietly only those nearest could hear. Assault, illegal concealed carry, criminal mischief, harassment. While everyone stared at that, Marcus turned calmly back to Greg. "Mr. Whitman, I have a few questions about these transfers to offshore accounts tied to vendors your board approved. You can answer them here, or we can continue this downtown." Vanessa finally cracked. "We didn't steal anything," she burst out, eyes wild. "It was reimbursement for all the time we put in, for making this place what it is. Nobody appreciates." "Vanessa," Greg hissed. Too late. People in the crowd started shouting. "I paid $5,000 for road repairs that never happened. My disabled sister got fined for leaving a ramp out for 1 hour. You threatened my kids over a plastic basketball hoop." Jessica, another quiet dissenter who'd bided her time, stepped up to the front. "I move," she said into the mic, "that we immediately suspend the current board's authority pending investigation and appoint an interim committee." Hands shot up, voices answered. The vote wasn't even close. Greg tried to walk out, but found his path gently blocked by Marcus and Sam. "Not so fast," Marcus murmured. "You're not under arrest yet, but we do need to chat." Hours later, after statements were taken and the room finally emptied, Lauren and I walked home in the heavy quiet that comes after a long storm. "Was all of that really necessary?" I asked. "Couldn't we have just filed a complaint about Brent and left it at that?" She thought about it. "We could have, and he might have been fired from here and hired at some other gated community down the road." She looked back at the rec center where the lights were dimming. But this wasn't just about one guy with a gun. This was about a system built on fear, money, and the assumption that nobody would fight back. Those don't fix themselves. 3 months later, Silver Ridge Landing didn't look different in photos. Same lake, same lawns, same houses. But the feel of it had shifted entirely. Greg faced multiple charges: embezzlement, fraud, tax issues stemming from those little reimbursements. Brent took a plea on the weapons and harassment charges and lost any possibility of working security or law enforcement again. Vanessa quietly sold their house and moved in with her sister across the state. Rachel was elected the new HOA president. Helen became vice president. Their first actions? Slash bloated security and landscaping contracts. Hire a reputable firm with properly trained, unarmed patrols. Publish full monthly financials in a shared drive. Rewrite the bylaws to align with actual state law. People started using the clubhouse again. Barbecues popped up where there once had been whispered complaints. I heard laughter from Helen's porch the first time her grandkids visited without her looking over her shoulder. On Lauren's last night before her new assignment, we sat on my back deck, watching the sunset turn the lake copper. "Do you ever get tired," I asked her, "of always being the one who steps in?" She laughed softly. "Constantly. But then I see Helen's grandkids playing tag instead of staring at a no trespassing sign, and I remember why it's worth it." She paused, then added, "You spent your life dealing with dictators in suits. I just traded them for dictators in golf carts." We clinked glasses. The next morning, she hugged me at the airport curb. "You gonna be okay here without your personal security detail?" she teased. "I think I can manage. Turns out the old man still knows how to handle a regime change." Since then, whenever an HOA anywhere in the region starts getting a little too bold, somebody in the room brings up Silver Ridge Landing, the place where a power-drunk security guard pulled a gun on the wrong woman and found out she wasn't just some suspicious person. She was an FBI tactical commander with a retired negotiator for a father and absolutely no patience for bullies. Not all heroes wear capes. Some of them wear worn-in jeans, carry a badge you won't see until you've gone too far, and know exactly how to turn a rigged game on its head. And if there's one lesson our former HOA will never forget, it's this: never point a gun at someone when you have no idea who they really are.